Wonderful. So hello to our wonderful group. We keep having people joining us. I am watching the chat and we have people from all over the world. It's fantastic. So we have about 56 people joining, so I'm going to get us started. And again, thank you so much for being here with us. I am really pleased to be your host facilitator. My name is Kira Stoll. I'm from the University of California in Berkeley in the United States. At the University of California, Berkeley, my role is Chief Sustainability Officer, and I focus on sustainability and climate solutions. And I wanted to let you know that tonight I will be facilitating the discussion and doing Q&A. And there is opportunity for you if you have questions for the audience to or for our speakers to please put them into the Q&A. There is a Q&A button for you on your Zoom screen. That's the best way for you to submit your questions for us. We will monitor the chat too, but appreciate that. I use the gender pronouns she, her, and hers. And I'm going to read now a statement of respect and inclusion for all of us. The Global University Climate Forum brings students together to share ideas, learn, connect, and act on the global imperative of addressing climate change. These are the forum principles of respect and inclusion. Be inclusive, strive to ensure that all feel welcome and valued. This applies to our speakers and guests, as well as our student participants. Be open, consider ideas that challenge your beliefs. If we support and learn from one another in this diverse group, we each become stronger. Listen honestly. The forum is a neutral and safe place for testing ideas and asking questions. Work to receive rather than react. Act mindfully, bring the values of respect, inclusiveness, and humbleness into your actions as a climate activist. In the spirit of respect and inclusiveness and humbleness of the organizers of the Global University Climate Forum, we acknowledge that in many cases, today's society is built on a foundation of oppression, whether it has been through forced occupancy of land or through the subjugation of people. There currently exists deep and seemingly incurable injustices throughout the world. The organizers of the forum ask that all participants consider their role in advancing a new future and putting us on a pathway to right these wrongs. I also did want to mention, which I should have at the beginning, but I think all of you know where you are at. You are at a discussion today, a session on how to enhance stewardship for global commons in the Anthropocene. And now I have the great honor of introducing our two speakers tonight. And it's tonight for me. I know it's probably early morning for others. I just wanted to let you know that just for our agenda today, our two speakers are each going to take 20 minutes to share their thoughts on these issues. And then we're going to have time at the end of the session for Q&A. So we're going to hold the questions for both speakers until the end. So I'm very honored to, like I said, have tonight Professor Naoki Ishii and Professor Maria Ivanova. Professor Naoki Ishii is a professor and director for the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. And Professor Maria Ivanova is the director for the Center of Governance and Sustainability at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And they're each going to share a little bit more about themselves when they speak. So tonight, let me introduce our first speaker will be Professor Ishii.
Hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, and maybe good night. I'm actually from Tokyo, so to me it's good morning. Let me actually find out how I can share the screen. But before actually that I enter into this slide, I also want to add one more self-introduction to Kira. Actually, that before I took this position, the director, the Center for Global Commons, I served a Global Environment Facility, a GEF, for 8 years as a CEO. And before that, I was mostly with the IMF, the World Bank, and Ministry of Finance in Tokyo. So I was very much in a kind of macroeconomics economy, or actually the more like an agency working for the macroeconomics. Then that when I joined the GEF, that my eyes actually that opened dramatically to that what kind of environmental crisis we were in. And to me, it's really shocking that the magnitude of challenge, but I was extremely shocked with myself that why during my 30 years of the IMF, World Bank, and Ministry of Finance, why we were so blind, or I am so blind with the level and the magnitude of challenge of global environment. So I completely converted from kind of macroeconomist to the kind of converted environmentalist during the last 8 years and working for the GEF. But it also gives me a quite a sheer fact that despite of GF and other agencies working for global environment for 20 years, or almost 30 years, we were not really able to arrest this downward spiral of global environment. And that also made me think that the what is kind of missing thing to steward this global environment, or in my word, it's a global commons. So that's why, in a sense, that I actually joined the University of Tokyo and become inaugurating the director for Global Commons. So that is actually that my passion to really find out what are the instruments, what are the tools, what are the mechanisms, in addition to ongoing, the existing system of either it's environmental treaties and the other, actually that the SDGs and other kind of that the efforts and the humanity have put for the last 20, 30 years. That's why I am here and try to do something for actually to steward the global commons. So that's me. I'm sure that maybe many of you have seen this extraordinary the image, and this is actually the September 9. And then this year, then a huge haze in San Francisco. We have never seen this, and the people in San Francisco thought that's the end of the world, where the world continues, but it's really, really shocking image. So I actually realized when I saw that the outcome of the police survey, thanks to the organizer. So I understand this audience is extremely well informed. So then maybe first few slides is a little bit of the repetition, or maybe you already knew it, but let me just go very, very quickly. So where this environmental crisis actually started, and what is the causes of this environmental crisis? So this is a very famous chart coming from Johan Rockström and his group, who actually proposed that a very interesting, important concept of planetary boundaries. So before I enter into this planetary boundaries picture, it's more like a background than before that. So that our world, let me just see, okay. Actually, that the current environmental crisis maybe went back that the industrial revolution that say 250 years ago, and since then that our economy has grown dramatically. And then with population, with the GDP, with foreign investment and infrastructure, the water is almost every aspect that we have recorded a dramatic development and economic growth. But these achievements are not really free. It actually that the company, it is a company with so many environmental pressure, so that this blue picture also showed us that what kind of environmental footprint the current economic growth and the causes. So it's very kind of similar pattern on the development and the growth side, and actually environmental cost side. These are the picture of the anthropocenic and the concentration, that the hydrogen pressure, that how much that the degradation of the environmental, sorry, the coastline, etc., etc. But then the picture is very clear that that it is really the current economic growth and the development which causes that the environmental pressure, environmental crisis. Just maybe go back to the further that actually the 100,000 years of the human and actually the Earth history, so that the Earth that current the modern humans who actually pop up in Africa, let's say that 80,000 years ago, that went through really a difficult time of that glacial period and the interval of the glacial period. But then for the last 10,000 years, that somehow we have miraculously enjoyed a very stable climate condition, and that is where that we developed that the current civilization, because the stability in the climate gives us an opportunity to do this agricultural revolution, agricultural civilization. It leads to that the current economic and the development achievement. But you can also see that this the stable period, geologists call it that the Holocene is really very unique period. If you take a look at this 100,000 years of the Earth history, and we enjoy that the Holocene so much, and that's where we end up being here. But then, as we just saw this and the current economic development and the causes that environmental pressure, that the scientists, and particularly Earth system scientists, actually ask that the right question: how far we can go as we are coming. That because we have started to see a lot of environmental pressure. So this group led by Johan Rockström, that the Earth scientists, Earth system scientist group measure, actually identify what are the key functions or the process and the functions which consist of this Earth system, and they measure that where we are in terms of their carrying capacity, that how much we can continue to push their the boundaries. So this is the result of their work. So they identified 9 important system or subsystem of the Earth system, and they measure that where we are in relationship with the capacity, and the results is really actually striking. That we talk a lot about the climate change, and yes, the climate change, we were in yellow zone, which is that we were actually getting out of this safe operating space. But actually the big deficit, the big danger comes from like a biodiversity integrity, and also that biogeochemical cycle, like phosphorus and nitrogen. And we were also in very much in the yellow in terms of the land system. Interestingly, that it doesn't give us enough alert and then the fresh water use. But anyway, 4 out of 9 the planetary boundaries that we are already exceeded, transgressed this safe operating space and enter into that high risk zone. And for some, we already transgressed that high risk zone. And then the scientists alerted us that once we go far away from this safe operating space, we may not be able to go back to this safe space. And we were apparently taking the huge risk of actually leaving this very comfortable Holocene. And then that arguably we enter the new geological era called the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene is actually that it's a era, geological era of the humans, and that's not really used in a very welcoming way. That they call it Anthropocene because this is the era that only one species, it's humans, have started to alert this function and the regulating process of the Earth system. And once that we leave the Holocene and enter the Anthropocene, scientists alerted us, we really don't know what kind of the system we enter, but it is very clear it's going to be very comfortable, the situation, and we are taking the huge risk of those, this uncharted the sea, and it's maybe projected that we enter into the hot Earth situation. So the all efforts we need to put is now how we not go so straightforward in this Anthropocene, or actually the hot house Earth, and try to come back to more like a stabilized that the situation that we, or they call it a stabilized Earth. So and maybe before we go to the commons, let me just go to this a few slides. Actually, the human beings are not really, not just staying silent. We have made a lot of progress or the effort for the last maybe 10 years, particularly during 2010s, that there are two very important agreements that in 2015, there is a Paris Climate Agreement, and also that the SDGs. And then SDG has 17 goals, but in our world, we try to use this and this wedding cake model, so that they put this 17 as a structure, the framework. And if you take a look at the bottom layer of this wedding cake, these are the 4 SDGs that which consist of this global commons. It's biosphere and the climate system, which in our world, in their words, it's non-negotiable, hardwired at the Earth system or constraints, and all other SDGs, the social one, the economic one, can be built based on that Earth system, stability with the Earth system be secured. So let's go back to this the global commons. So that working for 8 years at the GEF, trying to solve environmental treaties, Rio treaties, and climate, biodiversity, and land, also Minamata Chemical Convention and Stockholm Convention. I thought that the current system is not really adequate enough to arrest this environmental crisis. So what kind of things we need to help or to add that momentum, or actually the power to the current system. But why we are in this situation, because what we are really trying to safeguard is more like a global commons. That the commons is basically it's a shared natural system like pasture, the forest, the water basin, that the fishing, that the capacity. But then those even local commons are subject to the tragedy of commons, because it's each one of the community make a rational decision from their individual point of view to pursue their benefit by using commons. Commons are exploited to the point that they lose that the productivity, and then that everybody actually that at the end of the day suffers from it. So, but then so this is we call the economists call the tragedy of commons. But if they are the local commons, the local communities and the villages actually find out several ways to govern those commons through that the social contract, through the village contract, or kind of agreement within communities and between communities, because they clearly see that the consequences of each one's action to themselves. So it's much easier to govern the global local commons. But when it goes to global commons, here in my definition, the global commons is a planetary system, as we just saw, that the planetary system and functions which actually that make this Earth system as so comfortable to us, to our prosperity. Then that it's more like a climate system, biodiversity, and land and others, which are the foundation of the human prosperity. But then, and efforts, as we just mentioned, that are already made, that the 3 Rio conventions, and the other, that the scientific body, that the specialized body have been working, but we really don't have a very effective way to govern those global commons, partly because that once we move from local commons to move out of the local commons to global commons, we just don't see that the consequences of the each ones and utilizing that those and the global commons we treated them as if they are just infinite. And then, but we have clearly seen the result, the outcome of those actions, and through the climate change and a lot of extreme weathers and acidification of the ocean and loss of biodiversity, etc., etc. So that then the scientists are actually trying to think that how we can arrest those environmental degradation or the downward spiral. And there are several efforts and already also kind of added to the existing system. This is just one of those efforts that made by the World in 2050 Consortium. So that we have this SDG which aims at 2030, but in order for us to have a prosperity and the stability, that we really need to see that the 2050. So that let's imagine that what kind of world we want in 2050, and let us backcasting that what kind of pathway we should go through to achieve it. And to us, the 2030 is a kind of a transit to this 2050, the world we want. Here that the economists, the scientists, the practitioners come out of several transitional pathways to achieve those stability, the prosperity by 2050. And of course, the prosperity is built on that this hardwired condition that we keep the planetary boundaries and as it is, or we try to find a way to prosper within the planetary boundaries. And this group, the World in 2050, identified the 6 transitional pathways to achieve that goal. Let's see that what are those 6 they identified. Maybe very easy one is a decarbonization of the economy and society, and particularly, and actually that an accelerating energy transition. That is that right hand bottom of the right hand side. Then that there is another very important actors in the space, like in the smart cities. As you know, that we more than half of the population live in cities, and 80% of the economic activities are in cities. So that it's very natural to think that how those cities actually behave and the cities be built going forward. So the city can be a huge opportunity to achieve this award in 2050. So how we can build and then use the city space as a part of the transition system. So it's a so-called smart cities. Then that we have a food system. Very interestingly, not many people yet know that food system is the major threat to the global environment through its deforestation, through its land use, through its that the water use and the fluids and emission of the GHG and also chemical use, so that how we can make sure that our food system is sustainable and resilient and just to human, but also to the earth. So how to do this on the food system is make it the food system more sustainable is a huge chunk of the part of this transitional pathway. Then that the people talk a lot about the circular, how to make this linear economic model to much more circular, so that then sometimes we call the sustainable consumption and production, but then currently only 9% of the extracted resources go back to the production system. So how we can increase the circularity in our way of producing and consuming, and actually the disposing. So that's a kind of corner of the circular economy. Then that, of course, that everything is through human capital, so that how we could actually equip the human capital with those knowledge and skill and resilience to go through this transition pathway is extremely important. Then last but not least, that that we are acquiring this IT and the technology and the skills, how we can utilize this digital revolution to our benefit. Sometimes it's actually that it's accelerated transition, but it's sometimes the derailed acceleration the efforts. So that it's important to pay enough attention to this digital revolution. So these are the 6 transitions that we want to focus on. And I know that time is not that to my favor, so that I will skip this food system chart, but maybe that the organizer can share those slides. This is a several important actually that the slides at the food system, because as I just mentioned, that the food system is really the major threat to the earth system or environmental integrity, but it's not really well known. So that if we have time, we could focus on that a few minutes of the food, but I'm not doing it now. So that but let me just add one more minute to go back to the global commons. So that then, so what kind of efforts we need to add that in addition to this existing system, that treaties and then all the efforts and already put into the system. Maybe I just want to mention 2 things. That then, one is that the multi-stakeholder coalition to push that the system or subsystem going forward, because that one of the reasons why environmental treaties are not really working too well is maybe that against the original intention that blessed by head of state, that for the last 20-30 years, it ended up actually putting a lot of pressure of the environmental ministers at the national governmental system. And as we all know, the power of the environmental ministers are not necessarily the most powerful. And so that we put a lot of actually the pressure on those ministries, and what we really need is a total system transformation. So that while we need to empower more the environmental ministers, but what we really need is this total system transformation, which needs to be brought by this coalition, not only just the government coalition, but also the coalition together with the business and the citizens and the CSOs and the academic. And so how we could bring those coalitions. There are several important multi-stakeholder coalitions in each of the space that in this 6 transformation, that the Food and Land Use Coalition, Tropical Forest Alliance, and RE100, and the Smart Cities, and C40, and the others, on and on and on. So I have a lot of actually that the expectation of those multi-state coalition, which is bringing all leaders in the various sectors and the themes together to push those system transformation. That's one. currently under this Center for Global Commons at the Tokyo University, we are crafting that and also environmental, Global Commons Stewardship Index, which try to measure that each country's effort to steward the global commons. Those the effort can be positive, but can be negative. And once we were able to finalize those index, and then if we publish it, we are hoping it will spark a policy discussion among that key countries. So let me stop here. And I just wanna thank you that the organizers to give me this opportunity to talk to you, the audience, about that how to steward that global commons. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you, Professor Ishii. I'm sure you would hear a round of applause right now if we weren't on Zoom and we were in person. Really fascinating. And during the Q&A period, it would be, let's touch on the food topic, and your slides will be shared with the group through the LinkedIn area. So with that, I'm going to transition to our next speaker, to Professor Ivanova. If you would like to take over and bring up your slides, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just first start by saying thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you very much for bringing us together. And thank you, Professor Ishii, for your fascinating presentation. I would love to engage in a discussion about total system transformation, about the multilateral environmental agreements, and the institutional ways of pushing that evolution and the creation of a global coalition to make that happen. And I would like to congratulate Melissa Goodall and her team for convening this forum. I have the honor, the pleasure to have worked with Melissa for a number of years. When I was a graduate student myself, we started working together, and I'm now a professor, and we both are continue to be in the knowledge sector. And this is a term that Melissa has been pushing forward that I really appreciate. And we do hope to build the coalitions that Professor Ishii was talking about with the knowledge sector. That means you, all of you who are students, us who are on the faculty and the staff, the administration of these institutions, to create the necessary conditions to bring about the total system transformation. My name is Maria Ivanova, and I am a faculty member at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And I also lead the director of the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the university. And I am also now the graduate program director of the PhD program in global governance and human security at the university. And I would like to start with these two concepts: global governance and human security, the concepts and the institutions. And human security is a concept that was advanced by the Japanese government. And the definition that the Japanese government gives is the ability of people, actually it says the ability of humans to lead healthy and productive lives in harmony with nature. That is sustainability. That is human security. And global governance, the way I define it, is the design and execution of policy toward the resolution of concerns that affect more than one state or one region. The global issues, but they can be global in terms of the global commons, or they can be global in terms that they appear in many, many countries around the world. And so today I would like to talk about the institutions that whose mandate it is to push these issues forward. And that is UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, and the Global Environmental Conventions, the multilateral environmental agreements. And so I'll tell you a few stories about these two set sets of actors. And we'll start with UNEP, the UN Environment Program. And I'm, I'm delighted to share that my book on UNEP is just coming out in February. The Untold Story of the World's Leading Environmental Institution, UNEP at 50. And so the title reveals a little bit my position about this institution. I say it is the world's leading environmental institution. It was created to be that way. It was supposed to be that way. Well, is it? There are multiple theories about and even statements about what UNEP is and how it is performing. And so today I'd actually like to give you a little bit of the revisionist history, that untold story of what is different about UNEP's design, leadership, and location. Often in many international relations classes, you would read that states create international institutions in a way to advance their own power and their own national interests. Therefore, international organizations are weak by design. And I would love to engage in a discussion with Professor Ishii about that, because she led one of those international organizations, the Global Environment Facility. I had the honor actually to teach a class on UNEP with Mohammed El Ashri, who was the first CEO lead of the Global Environment Facility when I was a graduate student myself. And so I have been looking into these issues, discussing, debating, engaging in these for a number of years. And as I dug into the UN archives, asking, why don't we have a World Environment Organization? Why do we have such a weak international institution that is UNEP? Why don't we have a World Environment Organization or a Global Environment Organization, a GEO? I discovered that governments were not out to create an institution that was deficient by design. Governments did not create UNEP to be weak, which is often part of the narrative in international relations that I disprove in this book and in a lot of my writings. And so on design, I say UNEP is not deficient by design. Its design as a subsidiary body in the United Nations was there so that it could be part of the United Nations and to actually engage all the rest of the UN system and color their programs environmental. In terms of its leadership, there is leadership within and there's leadership by the organization. The leadership within the organization has been very fascinating. I do have a chapter with profiles of each executive director, and a lot of the credit for solving a lot of environmental problems go to particular people. And so the importance of individuals in institutions cannot be overstated. For example, the ozone layer, the depletion of the ozone layer is perhaps the only global environmental problem, or maybe even one of the few global problems that we have resolved. And the leadership role of Dr. Mustafa Toba, who was UNEP's executive director for 17 years, cannot be overstated. It was absolutely critical. So the leadership by the executive director of an international organization is very important. And then the leadership by the institution is also important, but it has not necessarily happened as much as we would have liked it to be. So as Professor Ishii was saying, environmental ministers are the weak ministers, and yet they are the constituency of UNEP. The UN Environment Assembly, the governing body of UNEP, convenes all the environmental ministers. That is who makes the decisions. That is who pushes the agenda forward. And yet environment ministers are often not the ones that, or they're always on the weaker side of national governments. But so how do you strengthen the leadership of an international institution in this case? And then finally, the location issue of UNEP is one that is discussed quite a bit, and in strange terms. I'd like you to, I wish that we had one of the questions, where is UNEP located? Think about it right now. If you were to ask, where is the headquarters of UNEP, of the UN Environment Program? I can't hear anybody right now, unfortunately, because we're not in the classroom. I wish we were really face to face, but maybe you can put it in the chat. Yeah, where is UNEP? There's not an immediate response that, and it often happens. Yeah, USA. Oh, USA, Switzerland. Okay, Dr. Ishii. You see,
Nairobi, yeah.
that we Switzerland, no, Kenya, yes. Yes, the award goes to Richa Agarwal. Yes, and Ricardo Garcia. UNEP is one of two international institutions located in a developing country, in Nairobi. The headquarters are in Nairobi. Only UNEP and UN Habitat, that is the UN agency for settlements, for human settlements, are located in Nairobi, and they were created at the same time in 1972 as a result of the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment that year in 1972. And in international relations, often scholars say that UNEP was located in Nairobi to be out of sight, out of mind, and that it was a purposeful decision to make it deficient. But that is not true. As I show throughout my research and have now finally written in this book, UNEP was not located in Nairobi to be incapacitated. Nairobi, Kenya, at the time in the 1970s, was a thriving country. It was a great place to put the new agency, and the logic was that we wanted, or governments at the time wanted, equitable distribution of UN headquarters. And therefore, we needed the next agency that was being created, and that was for the environment, UNEP, to be located in a developing country. And Kenya mounted a fantastic campaign for that. But it has been affected by being located in Nairobi, mostly because of the distance and the lack of connectivity. We are now connected, as this whole forum showcases. Look, we're connected from Japan to Chile. I saw someone was from Chile in the audience. We're literally around the world. But that was not the case for many decades. And it was an issue. And yet, when an international organization is in a developing country, it sees the problems, it sees what the issues are, and it is compelled to do something about it. Therefore, one of the biggest tensions that UNEP is facing is that of a normative mandate that it was given, as I mentioned in the beginning, to color the UN program's environmental. It was supposed to really inject this environmental thinking into all of the United Nations. But when you don't have a vector of interaction, when you're far removed, it's difficult. So what you do instead is you want to implement programs where you see the problems. If you are located where the problems occur, you are compelled to go and actually do something about them. And so therefore, UNEP has been drawn more and more into an implementation mandate. And therefore, there's been a bit of a tension between the original normative mandate, which is very lofty, it's ambitious, and it's very necessary, but also the necessity, by necessity, this implementation draw that this organization is facing, because when it is seeing these problems, when it attracts people who know how to resolve problems, it tries to do so, but then it becomes a competitor to many other international organizations. So I just want to emphasize design, leadership, location. about UNEP. It is not deficient by design. It has had leaders who have really empowered the resolution of global environmental problems. Perhaps it is not quite the world's leading environmental institution that we would like to see, but it could be and it should be. And its location is not a negativity, and it was an attempt to create equitable distribution of UN headquarters. And perhaps that is now an imperative that we should think about and work on a bit more and more creatively. So that's UNEP. But then there is this whole other set of global environmental institutions, which are the global environmental conventions. And they are arranged by topic, by clusters, on biodiversity, on chemicals, on atmosphere, on desertification, land, and world heritage, the World Heritage Convention. And so we have a number of different institutions, and Professor Ishii knows many of them well, because the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, is the financing mechanism for several of these conventions. And so I would like to talk with you a bit about these conventions and dispel a few myths about them, and show you an index that we have created. So I would love to start also the conversation about indices, and would love to learn more about the Global Common Stewardship Index that you are developing in Japan. We have developed the Environmental Conventions Index at the Center for Governance and Sustainability. And this is the product of a dissertation, which is Natalia Escobar Pemberti's dissertation. And Natalia is the project manager for this forum, and she works with Melissa, and she's part of this event right now. And so I want to say this is our collective research, but this is Natalia's dissertation. So in the end, I'd like you to think about what will your dissertation be, and where would you like to do your dissertation? So three things about multilateral environmental agreements, or about the conventions that we kind of think are true, and they're reinforced often both in the literature but also by policymaking. Usually we say developing countries, and I saw many of you come from developing countries, are not implementing these conventions, these many conventions. They have trouble implementing them because they don't have the finances, because they don't have the capacity, they don't have the institutions. Fair enough. That's what we believe. And we often say developing countries, and we think this is all developing countries. And on the flip side, we often say developed countries do implement these conventions, should implement them, because they have the finances, they have the capacity, they have the institutions. And then third, and those of you, since most of you are students, would relate to that, we assume that reporting by countries to these conventions would not happen if there are too many questions in the national reporting requirements. Often we assume these national reports, if they're very long, countries will not respond to them, right? If your exam is too long, you might not answer all of the questions. So these are the things that we actually kind of believe to be true, and we often negotiate on this basis in the international scene. And with the work that Natalia did and our whole team, what we did together is that we found quite a different story that is counterintuitive, and it is quite positive. So this is our Environmental Conventions Index, and the results I will share for 4 different conventions. And what we do is we take the answers in the national reports that countries submit to the conventions, and we code them and rank them, and then we actually come up with a grade. For example, Basel Convention, question number 1, do you have a definition for hazardous waste? The possibilities are yes, no, in progress. Yes is a 5, the deep green. No is a 1, in progress is a 3. And then you get from 0 is if you didn't answer. We know that you can answer, but you haven't answered. And the white spaces on the screen are the ones that are not a member. So you see the United States there is not a member. And so with the colors, you see a very counterintuitive and quite a positive story. It's counterintuitive because developing countries are not performing necessarily badly. And I saw that there were people from Vietnam, from Chile, from Mexico. So see, Mexico is performing really well here. And Natalia is from Colombia. I am originally from Bulgaria. Colombia is deep green, so is Bulgaria. And so you see this very different story that actually is quite a positive story. And the story for the Stockholm Convention is quite different. The Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants is much more technically demanding. And so here we see developing countries are doing less well. Developed countries are performing much better. I saw someone was from Australia. Australia is doing pretty well. So is Japan. And the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, however, is the one convention with the largest number of questions and the highest reporting rate of 86% reporting rate. Africa had reported 100% of the time, all the African countries. And so you see here the results and you see where the deep green is. The deep green is in Asia, and the deep green is even in Africa. And we have to start asking why. And finally, the CITES Convention, that's the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. You see a lot of dark gray because countries are not reporting. This is a convention where the United States is doing actually quite well. So there are very interesting stories. We can tell you with this index about what is the level of implementation. We cannot yet tell you why. This is what we are trying to do. And this would be a fantastic project to actually work with the Jeff and figure out, knowing the Jeff's experience, can we figure out why this is the case? Can we go deeper in these countries? Could we actually identify the champions and work with them and work to name and acclaim countries rather than name and shame? And this work is, Natalia and I just finished this article on the implementation of multilateral environmental agreements. It is open access. They'll put it in the chat in the journal Sustainability. So it's easy to get this, and you will get all of the maps in that. And with that, I would like to finish with my final plea or offer to consider the Global Governance and Human Security PhD program at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. This is our campus right on the ocean, right? You see downtown Boston. We do accept students from around the world. We do offer scholarships for 3 years, full scholarships. And I would be delighted to connect with many of you and talk about your thinking of where you would like to go next in your professional careers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ivanova. That was fantastic. I have learned so much in the last 40 minutes myself, and we do have about 15 minutes for Q&A, but just really appreciated both of you taking us through how did we get to where we are today. Really helped enlighten an understanding of the kind of the commons and the local versus the global kind of perspectives and actions that we're can and can't take. And then some really kind of positive insights into kind of the structures and the governance that we have in place, which we can leverage to make changes for the better. So I do want to jump into the Q&A that we've had. We've got some really great questions here. I want to just start with one, which kind of contextualizes where we are today, and I think is kind of a good starting place for us to think about how we can start leveraging these solutions that you've shared with us. So Valerie Patron Mendoza has asked, the world has shown it can radically change on a matter of days to survive a crisis, COVID-19. Environmental and climatic crisis, on the other hand, has not had that impact. How can we push that radical transition to occur? And what can we learn from the crisis? Professor Ishii, would you like to take first go at that?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And we were kind of also shocked that thanks to the COVID-19, actually that in the world, that the countries that let's say the politicians put so many trillions overnight, while that the environmental community has been really struggling to even get 100 billion from climate change, green climate fund. So that what is the difference between those environmental contribution to the environmental treaties and issues versus COVID-19. To me, that the COVID-19, it's really that they clearly see that the challenge, the threat to the human lives of its politicians do care most for good reasons, while the global environment, as I just mentioned, also in my speech, this is more like an unfortunately consequences of our undermining the environment is a little far away. People really don't see the causes and consequences together. So that we still do have the problem of tragedy of global environmental commons, and that's where actually that we were really pushing our efforts together. But just about COVID-19, that we, the environmental committee, really try to make the case, and it's actually we believe in that the root cause of COVID-19 is also environmental crisis, because that in 2000 and 2010, for the last 10, 20 years, we have seen the same kind of disease happening that in SARS and MERS and others. And this is because we, the human economic system, push our the settlement and the food system to so close to the ecosystems and the break that the integrity of the ecosystem. That's why we continuously having this kind of disease. So the fundamental solution to that problem, like COVID-19, is how to transform our current economic system through this infrastructure, that the urban settlement and food system. But it's also very difficult to push that narrative to the public community, so that our saga continues, so that we can so far, but the green recovery provide us an opportunity to make sure that all tons of money, trillions of money, will actually not just do that, build back better, but actually build it forward towards a greening recovery, meaning that how to ensure the natural capital and other important global environmental concern, global commons, to be a part of this and decision making at this time. So that is my take to answer to that very important question.
Thank you. And Professor Ivanova, if you might have a few words on that, and I'd also be interested to hear if UNEP has responded, how UNEP might be responding in particular to the pandemic and the connection to the environment.
Yes, the connection to the environment is very clear. The origins of this crisis have been attributed to zoonotic disease and the wet market and our consumption, the human consumption of wildlife. And that is a clear connection with environmental issues. And UNEP has responded. It has, of course, written a number of reports like international institutions do immediately, but it has started to think about making these connections much more explicit and being much more in the public sphere. And in terms of what we have learned, I really like the question and how it is posed, that what can we learn from this crisis? To me, one of the biggest lessons has been the importance of governance, because we have responded differently in different countries, in different states. In the United States, every state responds differently. And then every country responds differently. Now every university is responding differently. And this is something that we have to figure out, because there is no predictability, there is no coherence, there is no coordination. And so now every university is being asked, are you online? Are you hybrid? Are you in person? And how do we decide what is happening? We need a much more coordinated, coherent, and intentional governance system. And that is not happening at the multilateral level. And that is something where we do need leadership.
Thank you. And I don't know if we will have a chance to get to this today, but I am very interested to also hear kind of in this idea of transforming the governance. How do we empower these environmental ministers, or is it kind of maybe in a different structure? Maybe it's somebody else that needs to be sitting in these groups. So maybe if you have a few thoughts on how maybe the COVID crisis might help us to kind of activate and empower these ministers.
Yeah, if I might just take that question, Kira. Actually, I do not necessarily think that the environmental ministries have to be the center of the all questions. Actually, to be also very honest and frank and maybe provocative, 8 years working for the GF really made me think this current setup of how to deal with this environment is not really adequate, it's not really best suited to the challenge that we need to address, because it's not the environmental issue anymore. It's, as also Maria, Professor Ivanova mentioned, it's a total system transformation we need. And it's not really just the environment, it's really the whole of the government. And it's not only government issue, it's also the business issue, it's an academic issue. To be absolutely frank, that the UNEP is not that kind of organization to cover all of those and actually that questions. So that's why when we come up with this Center for Global Commons, we try to really come up with a better governing model, or the instrument to steward the global commons. My belief is that we need to really create the leadership that which is not necessarily the government, it's not just the policy maker, it's not just the politicians, but coming from the all diverse and the square of the world, from the business and the national government, but also the local government and academics and of course that the politicians together. But the way we should organize is not just a big and kind of the meeting, but we need to go the issue by issue, system by system, subsystem by subsystem, to really address the key questions, what the key system we want to transform, like a biodiversity convention. This is entirely it's an environmental ministers convention. However, if you look at why we are losing this and the biodiversity so dramatically, it's our agriculture. And usually agriculture ministers and environmental ministers are not really coming together to address, and almost all part of the world, agriculture ministers are much more powerful. And it's not just agriculture ministers, it's a huge agriculture lobby behind it. So that what we really want to do is to really focus on those issues, that issue-based coalition, multi-state coalition, to put all key leaders in each of the community together to come up with a kind of practical way of addressing those issues. And that's why I'm putting this multi-stakeholder coalition at the heart of the new global actually governance mechanism to steward the global commons. Thank you.
Let me just jump in here quickly and say this is exactly right. No one issue can be resolved by any one constituency anymore. And this is why universities are turning more and more to transdisciplinarity. We are teaching transdisciplinary approaches because those are the approaches that you take a problem, and if you have to resolve a problem, you have to bring the different constituencies together, those who caused it, those who suffer from it, and those who actually ethically think that it's wrong. And it's all different stakeholders, and that requires totally different governance, and it requires a very different mindset. And this is why gatherings like this and fora like this are really important, because when you as students, as professionals, go out into the world, it is really important that you have the mindset that how things are connected, and to have integrated approaches. And so I do think that environmental ministers need to be stronger, but they don't need to be the only ones. And they need to be stronger in terms of taking the lead more, taking the initiative more, stepping out more. And I also, this is one issue with UNEP itself, is it needs to step out, but give credit at the same time to everyone else. And how do you do that? How do you create a coalition where you are taking the lead and at the same time you are giving the credit to everybody else? And that's a new skill.
Very interesting. Thank you. And I think this is a question from Harumi Takano, and it's a nice kind of segue from what we were just talking about. Is it possible to reach sustainability within a capitalist world? And kind of in this interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary idea, how can we leverage the UN sustainable goals, and are they enough to do this?
If may I respond, SDGs and those 17s are not necessarily good enough. It doesn't assure or guarantee anything unless we really do have a good enough framing and framework and actually instruments to achieve it. That's why this 3-layer wedding cake is important to understand this framing, but it doesn't give us any kind of tools to implement it. And that's why maybe Maria or the Professor Ivanova and I both talk about the importance of multi-stakeholder approach, interdisciplinary approach to focus on the issues. So that kind of new governing mechanism is extremely crucial. Professor Ivanova mentioned the importance of that multi-stake and from various constitutions, and that is why I also put the Center for Global Commons as a mechanism to mobilize or catalyze those changes. But then and it quite depends on not just the ministry, the Ministry of the Environment, but really that all leaders from various constituencies, and that's why I see the future of global governing mechanism of those commons.
And I mean, the question is point blank. Is it possible to reach sustainability within the capitalist system?
Yeah.
But it's a very good question. And now we will see many more different answers than before COVID. And so perhaps this is one lesson from the COVID crisis, that there are many, many more people actually questioning some of the tenets that a capitalist economy, at least, is trying to pursue, where we put profit before everything else. The current crisis has questioned that undeniably. And I am the product of another academic who was in the policy world, Gus Speth, who used to be the head of the UN Development Program, and then was the dean of the Environment School at Yale. And he wrote a fabulous book, really questioning capitalism and saying that a lot of the environmental problems actually derive from a lot of the tenets that capitalism carries. So it was called The Bridge at the Edge of the World. So those of you who are interested in reading that, and it was written many years ago, in the early 2000s, maybe. Melissa, you can put it in the chat and correct me if
2008.
Yeah, 2008. And so there are people who have been in the system leading the UN Development Program and questioning, asking these very same questions. And I think that we now need to be quite tough with these questions. And I am based in the United States. I'm based in Boston. And many of you have seen what is happening in terms of racial equity and the reckoning that this country is going through. And we are asking exactly the same question.
Yeah, sorry, I just forgot to mention that the directly response to the question raised about this capitalism. And it's actually, I'm very, in a sense, it's kind of optimistic that the more and more global leaders, that regardless of where he or she comes from, actually recognize the new way of managing this economy. You may have heard a word that from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, where we recognize that it's not just the purpose of that capital, so purpose of the company is not just a pursue that the profit that the company should serve, that the much broader stakeholders. That's the meaning of from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. It becomes the buzzword for the last 2 years. And also it's not just a word, and they try to come up with a kind of instrument and tools to measure not only those financial capital, but also the natural capital, the human capital, societal capital. That you may also have heard a lot of discussion about how to measure those the various capitals. They come up with a common matrix of how to identify those capitals rather than beyond the financial capital, how to measure it, measure them, and how to report consistently to those several capitals so that they can navigate, they can stir the financial flows into those companies to steward those kind of global commons. So I'm more optimistic that when I see those new movements are not from ministries, but from more like a business people and the CSOs together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We are at time, and there was, I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. I do hope our hosts capture these questions, and maybe throughout the process, you can get some of these questions answered. Anyway, big thanks to Professor Ishii and Professor Ivanova. Your work is fantastic. We are a little bit over, but as all of us in this virtual room together today are all part of higher education institutions and kind of that knowledge piece. If either of our speakers would like to just share maybe one final thought for us on what we can do, where we're placed now, you know, what is something that we can do to help move this issue forward?
Maria, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think that we need to change our narrative. This is the one thing that I think we all can do. Think about what of your narrative has been negative or has not moved the agenda forward, and think of one thing that you can change, that you could say differently, that you could listen differently, and then hopefully bring about change through what we put out in the world.
Fantastic, thank you.
No, thank you, because I want you to go ahead because you have much clearer view about the education side and then not talking to students. In my word, actually, on my side, my eyes are only opened the last 80 years working for the global environment directly. So I'm not necessarily have a strong credential to talk to the students. But it was very shocking to me that when I see the scientific evidence directly in my eyes, so it's important for us not to be blind with those unconventional or stereotyped information. So it seems important for you to be always very curious and then to those enough lot of information. And to me, the narrative is important, but also to come up with some kind of tools to really implement, to take actions and for those narratives to become real is another very important thing. So I'm hoping this Global Commons Index to become a tool to steer, collect the individual actions and decisions to serve the global cause. So our dream is big, and let's see that what will come out in 3 years' time. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us, and to our organizers of this. It's been really insightful, and I'm looking forward to opportunities to continue this conversation with the group. Thank you.
Thank you.